What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? Wanted to talk a little football today. Why? Because we're coming down the home stretch, and there are football games to be played. The Lions, who potentially could lose Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson in the next several weeks whenever they get bounced from the playoffs or the Super Bowl, or hell, win the whole thing. There's a decent chance that both their coordinators are gone. And why the opportunity for them, it might be now or never. The Cowboys, who are a good example of that, they were rattling off Super Bowls, and they haven't been back to an NFC Championship game in 30 decades or in 3 decades, 30 plus years, right? Think about that. Who would have ever thought that when I was a kid? I would have thought they would win forever. And that just isn't the case. So, some thoughts on Jerry Jones. There was a story out there about Jason Witten that kind of made me chuckle that I wanted to touch on. And then something in regards to the quarterbacks that are playing this weekend. And why I think overall the NFL is just such a tough business when it comes to drafting players and the difficulty behind that. I did want to start with the Lions. And when they blew the NFC Championship game, Dan Campbell said after the game what he told the team was, listen, guys, I love you guys, and this team was awesome, but there is no guarantee that we'll ever make it back here. And it was very real. I remember watching the press conference going, damn, man. And they had a chance, obviously, they kicked the field goal to take a 3-score lead in the second half, and the 49ers wouldn't have just been on the ropes. It would have felt like borderline impossible for them to come back. And the Lions melted down, and the 49ers ended up winning that game. But I give the Lions a lot of credit that they not only answered the bell in 2024, they dealt with an insane amount of adversity when it comes to the guys injured on their team, and had the best season in the history of their franchise, are the number one seed, and everyone has to come through Detroit. And let's face it, the NFC, relative to even last year, doesn't feel quite as good. You know, I think clearly the Eagles are the second best team, but they got some major question marks with when their quarterback plays just not a great game. Like, they can be beat. You just have to find a way to score a couple times on them because they struggle to score, especially early in games. And A.J. Brown's reading that book for a reason. You know, he doesn't want to attack his quarterback. He wants the rock, and the quarterback can't get him the ball. But there is a decent chance. I would say, read a report this morning from my guy Vic Tafer that and Florio's been all over this, the tampering of Tom Brady and the Lions. He's calling the game this weekend. I never would have thought this a couple weeks ago, but signs and momentum is starting to lend itself to Ben Johnson ending up with the Raiders. And a big reason for that is because the Raiders are the only job. He's not interested in the Jets job, but when it comes to the franchise like the Bears or the Jags, those teams have general managers. And this was a big reason Mark Davis fired Telesco is you get a clean slate. And if you're interested in getting a guy like Ben Johnson, and Brady's clearly pushing for that, he can bring along his personnel guy, which signs point to that being Adam Peters, right-hand guy as assistant GM, who came from the Lions. So they know each other pretty well. And I watched Aaron Glenn give a press conference today. I just thought it was fantastic. He kind of pushed back on the notion that he's a defensive coach. And he's like, I'm a football coach. If you're hiring me, you're not getting a defensive coordinator, you're getting a football coach. I will talk to the offense as much as I talk to the defense. And clearly, Aaron Glenn is not just an impressive football guy. I mean, he had an unreal career as a player. His now career as a coordinator has been fantastic. And that job he did against Minnesota the other night was honestly the blueprint for McVay and Chris Shula that kicked the shit out of Kevin O'Connell. So Aaron Glenn, from a schematic standpoint, is obviously really impressive. And you watch him talk, you're like, this guy's awesome. And Ben Johnson mentioned today, he's like, I've never been around a guy more prepared to be a head coach than this guy that isn't a head coach. And obviously these guys have had a front row seat learning from Dan Campbell, who clearly is a complete ass kicker. The Lions are going to be good next year. They have a ton of good players under contract in the prime of their career. But anytime, assuming that they lose their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator, like, those are pretty big shoes to fill. And there is no guarantee that they're going to be as good on either unit when you lose the guy calling the plays. So when you look at the Lions, like what they did bouncing back in that scenario was impressive. And we have seen teams lose in the championship game and bounce back the following year. The 49ers did it like 3 straight years. But to me, this is the year to go for broke to make the Super Bowl. Because if you don't make the Super Bowl with these two guys, it's going to be much more difficult when these guys are gone. And it all lines up. You have the number one seed, you got a week of rest, you get a team coming off that, let's face it, no one thought would be in the second round. I looked earlier today, they're a 9.5 point favorite. They will be favored, assuming they win this game, against obviously the Rams and even the Eagles, while the spread would be bigger against the Rams. They would be a field goal favorite against the Eagles at home. And it's a massive advantage given how loud that place is. So I listen, I'm rooting for the Lions. I think it would be an awesome story for the NFL. They have been an awesome story for the NFL the last 2 years, but now it's real. Like this is not the Ravens and the Bills where it's like, can we take down Patrick Mahomes? Can we do this? Right? And the answer might be no, you can't. And we might learn over the next 2 weeks, whoever wins that Bills Ravens game, like you're dealing with Michael fucking Jordan here. You're dealing with Tom Brady, you're dealing with Tiger Woods, you're never beating them. And you know what? That's okay. That doesn't diminish who you are. You're still a great player, a great team, you're Hall of Fame, both Lamar and Josh Allen. But they might never beat that guy. It might just never happen. That ain't the case here. I saw the Eagles get their brakes beat off by the Bucks last year. I just watched them struggle against the Green Bay Packers. Now, I like the Eagles. I think if their passing game is working, they're going to be tough to beat, but the opportunity is there for the Lions. And I think Dan Campbell knows it. Like, it doesn't get any better than this, especially when you have the cohesion of the coaching staff. So I do think I'm recording this on a Wednesday. I think these next 10 plus days are kind of going to define this era of Lions football. And if they go to the Super Bowl, even if they were to lose to one of those AFC teams, obviously the Chiefs, but even if one or the other, listen, you took the Detroit Lions to the Super Bowl. It's one of the greatest accomplishments I've ever seen in my entire life. But you can't have one of those moments where you got really close and you didn't get over the hump, because next year's going to be a lot more difficult. NFL playoffs. We're talking about the NFL playoffs. You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is a key to winning in the NFL playoffs. And the key to you scoring big is betting on them at DraftKings, the number one place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something as simple like a player to score a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Here's another reason to watch your favorite players crush it in the playoffs. New customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big during the NFL playoffs with the DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use the code JOHN, J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. I've always defended Jerry Jones. I've always just kind of liked him. I like guys that kind of beat to their own drum. They don't just get in line. Those are the type of guys that I'm drawn to. That's what, I admire that quality in human beings. But there is a point in time where it's like, what are you doing? And I thought with the McCarthy situation, like, why not just fire the guy on Black Monday so you can move on? Even if it's like, well, they missed their window to interview this guy and that guy. It's even less about that and more just what a waste of time looking back the last 4 or 5 days have been of them talking, when clearly they both knew this was probably inevitable. I'm a huge believer the older I get of like not wasting time. I mean, it's literally the most valuable thing we have, right? Beside like our children or our parents. Like I'm talking like physical beings, but I'm just saying in life, our job, any money we have, our time, right? And it can end. Obviously, we all can die at any given moment. So there is no guaranteed time past right now or tomorrow or the next day. None of it's guaranteed. So the older you get, being efficient with your time is really important. And it does feel like the Cowboys just completely wasted a week when they had to have known before the season ended, like Mike was probably gone. Even though most of us, after the week, before the story broke, just assumed McCarthy was going to stay. Because how would they not keep him after they've just been hanging out for the week talking football? But this is Jerry Jones. And I was thinking about I do get where Cowboys fans go is like, as long as Jerry's there, we're screwed. And I always thought, like, I don't know, man, just hire the right guy. I do think it's basically impossible when you look around the league if your owner is the star. Because I've said this about like when the Rams and Niners play, the two poster people of the game are not any players. It's McVay and Shanahan. But that's fine. The poster child or the poster player or the poster person for your franchise can be a coach and not a player. That's okay. I would argue with the Detroit Lions, who you'd put on the poster. I would put Dan Campbell. Now you get the AFC teams, it would probably be Mahomes, Lamar, and Josh Allen, obviously. But I don't think anyone would argue if you put Andy Reid up on the poster. It was Belichick and Brady forever. As long as it's either your quarterback or your coach, you're in pretty good shape. And when you look at the NFL, like hell, I'd even argue the Eagles. You could argue it's like Howie Roseman, right? Now, more than likely it'd be like AJ Brown or something, but Jalen Hurts. But regardless, it's not the owner. And when you look at the best teams left in the final, whatever, 8 of the playoffs, their owner's nowhere to be found. I mean, absolutely. When you think about the AFC teams, the 3 AFC teams, which I would say right now feel like the best 3 teams in the league. Maybe the Lions will have to see how their defense if they can answer the bell again. But when do you ever hear from Steve Bisciotti? Unless you're reading like Raven article after Raven article. But if you're just like casually watching football, follow it really closely, and definitely follow the best teams, I never see him around. The only thing I ever see about the Hunt family is his daughter, who's all over Instagram. When you look at the Bills, like the Poligulas, I never hear or see from them. The Lions, the only time that I think of the Ford family are like my friends that drive F-150s. My brother just got a new one. It's pretty sweet, actually. So to me, when your owner is obsessed, and which is his right, he was the guy with the enormous balls that risked it all back in the late 80s and bought the Cowboys, which is easy. And every loser says, like, oh, what an easy purchase. Easy to say 30 years later. At the time, it was pretty crazy. But I do think, and I heard Jane Slater, who has covered the Cowboys forever, say that, Jerry's not that big on paying assistant coaches and having a big coaching staff and paying scouts a lot of money. So while Jerry had enormous cojones and big balls to buy the Cowboys, and obviously it fed his ego and it turned him into this star and famous person, he still has some of the wiring of the guy that bought the team that didn't have the cash. So when I read that, like, yeah, he doesn't love certain things when it comes to money, like that's a problem. So it's like you're gonna be the superstar, but then also pinch pennies on little things. It's kind of embarrassing. And at this point, he's 80 plus years old. He's not changing. He is what he is. He acknowledged this year, like, I'm always going to be the GM essentially till I die or physically can't do it anymore. Cowboys are screwed as long as he's around. It will not change. And it's taken me longer, and I'm not in it like some of you that are big fans, or even some of you that if you're an Eagle fan or if you're a Giants fan or a Washington fan that play them all the time and feel really close to the Cowboys. We obviously on this show don't just talk about the Cowboys to talk about the Cowboys like definitely some television shows do. Uh, but it's just not going to work. And we have a long line of evidence, but I think these last 6, 7 days were pretty embarrassing for the franchise. And if I was a fan, I'd be like, yeah, John, we always do this dumb shit. We did it with Jason Garrett. And one thing he's clearly obsessed with, which I understand, is to like have a homegrown guy and make him your head coach. Because he looks back and Sean Payton was once working for the Cowboys. And Sean Payton got away and went to New Orleans and became a star. Dan Campbell was a former Cowboy player who was Bill Parcells' guy and now is a coaching star. He literally tried to do that with Jason Garrett, thinking Jason Garrett was like his Shanahan, his McVay, his Dan Campbell. Like that was his guy, homegrown. And it didn't work. Why? Because Jason Garrett's not that good. He's actually a sneaky, cocky, arrogant guy for a very, very average coach. And he's like this highly educated Ivy League guy who, when you watched his teams, did not feel that innovative or that much smarter than the opponent. I forget the school Belichick went to, like Wesleyan. But when you watch Belichick, you always felt like, is he the smartest guy in the NFL? That's why Vrabel became a coaching star. He's just Ohio State meathead who's clearly pretty fucking smart. Do you know who never tells me how smart they are? Mike Vrabel. And I think what Bob Kraft just did with Mike Vrabel felt very organic, right? He was available. He tried to do it with Mayo. Like they're very desperate to have their own guy because I understand this. If put yourself in their shoes, if you're worth billions of dollars, it's very hard to trust. And I think you see so many teams hire the wrong coach who then you fall out of favor with. He's not good enough. And it just gets really, really ugly fast. But when you know the guy, it's much easier to deal with him. Right. And that's what Jerry had the relationship with Jason Garrett. It just turned out Jason Garrett wasn't even nearly as good as Mike McCarthy. But now when I read a story that Jerry wanted to have Jason Witten on Mike McCarthy's staff so he could be the heir apparent, you need these things to be organic, right? Like when you look at the great Washington staff that gets anytime any one of these guys play each other, it always gets thrown up on television, right? Mike Shanahan hired Kyle Shanahan, who then hired LaFleur, McDaniel, McVay, like all these cats, right? And it just becomes like a huge deal. Like, look at what you had under your umbrella as a franchise. But it naturally happened. It wasn't one of those that, like, I knew all these guys were going to become a head coach because no one would have said that in 2012 or 2013. Just like, honestly, when the 49ers in 2018 were awful and headed to draft Nick Bosa, I wouldn't have been like, you know who's got a bunch of future head coaches? The 49ers. Turns out they did. From Mike McDaniel to DeMeco Ryans to obviously Robert Saleh, had a ton of guys underneath, but no one thinks that at the time. But it organically happens. Like, there was a time when I bet people thought Sean Payton was impressive, but no one thought he would become what he became in New Orleans. I bet everyone around the Philadelphia Eagles in 1997 thought John Gruden was a young, ascending coach, but didn't know 25 years later he would be the most famous coach, in the profession, right? Obviously, a lot of that has to do with off the field, but he was the Monday Night Football guy for 10 plus years. I don't even think hiring Jason Witten to be on the staff is crazy. I remember when Jason Witten was on television, it's like, this is not the right profession for him. He's not an entertainer. Drew Brees, same thing. Like, Drew, you're not an entertainer. You're a football guy. You belong in football. If you don't want to put in the hours as a coach, totally understand. Be like a team president. Be a football czar. Go run the Saints. I think that about Tom Brady. I think Tom Brady is destined to do what John Elway was for the Broncos. It's just in his blood. He's not good on television. Pains me to say that. I like Tom Brady. Always been a huge fan. He's terrible on TV. I will die on that hill. Honestly, he's awful. He's unlistenable, which is sad. But honestly, not that shocking. This is not a skill that everyone has. Some guys are like, listen, say what you want about Gruden, the coach, and listen, it's more than up for debate. Is he that good or not? He's just a natural entertainer. It comes very natural to him. Even Tony Romo is very, very relatable. He went through a rough stretch where I thought he got a little cheesy, but he's an easy listen. Tom is not. And I don't think that's necessarily going to change. Whenever I hear anyone say, like, he's gotten a lot better, bullshit. I've tried. It's not good. But you know what Tom Brady's going to inevitably be? He's going to run the Raiders. And you know what? That's the right move. That's what he should be doing. That's his skill set. And Jason Witten, when you watch him on TV, you're like, this is not for you, buddy. This is not working. And now he's a high school coach. And if he likes coaching, like, he could be a coach. But like, Dan Campbell's a good example. Dan Campbell had to be assistant coach for a long time before he became an assistant head coach, before he became a head coach. You can't just all of a sudden become the heir and the heir apparent. We've seen that try to happen with like Gerard Mayo and Antonio Pierce, former players, former high-level players, Super Bowl champs. And they were completely over their head. It's like, yeah, this is not going to work. So I think some of this stuff from Jerry, I think his heart's in the right place. I think he's trying to do the right thing, but you can't force this stuff. It has to organically happen. And right now, nothing around the Cowboys feels natural, organic, and I think it starts and ends with him. And a lot of you guys have been saying that forever, and it's clear. It's very evident right now that he's the problem, which is usually how it ends for these old rich guys because they usually don't become more open-minded. They don't usually don't, and rightfully so. Why would he? I mean, he's printing cash. I mean, when the reports come out as part of the reason I saw Coward say this that Matt Mosley told him that one of the reasons Jerry was cool with getting rid of McCarthy is he felt like the fans were turning on them and there were empty seats. Which I go, Jerry, empty seats, full seats, who gives a shit? Worry about winning. The only thing the seats, like you don't even make that much money on your seats. You've already sold the PSLs, right? If there's a couple empty seats, like that's a football problem because your football team sucks. But like if you win, people will show up. And let's face it, you make the majority of your money from the television revenue anyway. So I just think Jerry is like living in the 80s, but he's got this modern day money and he's clearly, obsessed with power and ego, and he's 82 years old. And usually that's a bad combination. I want to end on this because I was watching TGL golf, which is entertaining for about 20 minutes, then it becomes kind of boring. But so I just had the television on ESPN, and then it ended. Tigers team got demolished, and the Duke game came on, and it had already started. So when they changed, the game was already a couple minutes in. And beside like Instagram highlights, I have never watched this Cooper Flag guy play. I was actually in the car yesterday and I was flipping around the radio and I turned it to on Sirius, like college, it's essentially college football radio. And Rick Neuheisel and a couple other guys were hosting a show and they had this one of the ACC network guys call in and they were talking football, but then this guy I think actually was calling the game last night for ACC radio maybe or I don't know. And he started talking about Colin Cooper Flag's games and how this guy's been around the ACC Durham for decades and say I think he's one of the best freshmen I've ever seen. He said he was the best ACC freshman he'd ever seen non-center. And I was watching him like this guy's fucking incredible. And he's like, listen, people are gonna think I'm nuts, but he threw out. I think he's like Larry Bird. And you're watching him and you go, it's gonna be impossible for this guy not to be a good NBA player. Like the only way he could not be a good NBA player if he gets injured. Like the only way Zion was going to fail is the way he's failed. He gets injured and he gets fat and lazy, right? But it's not his talent. His ability, if he's healthy and just in shape, he scores 25, 30 points, no problem. And like you watch Zion in college, it was like it's going to be impossible for him to fail. In football, that does not happen, right? Because if it did, Trevor Lawrence would be a top 10 quarterback. There are so many other variables. The one, just the level of competition you have in college to who's going to be your coach, who's going to be the play caller, what's your organization, uh, who's your roster. It's why when I saw the headline that 7 of the 8 of these quarterbacks are first rounders. And obviously, Goff and Stafford are number 1 overall picks. Jaden and CJ are number 2 overall picks. Mahomes was 10. Josh Allen was 7. Lamar had this like crazy drop, and he still was a first rounder. To me, Jalen was the craziest draft pick of them all because I thought when Howie did it, I thought it was insane. To me, Jalen was like a 5th round pick. Honestly, I thought he was a running back coming out of college. But good move by Howie. Saved the franchise. They were able to get rid of Carson Wentz because of it. But I think it shows you, and this is why the pressure, whenever I say, quarterback inflation's going to end. No, it's not. It's really not because no one knows. You have absolutely no clue. It's so easy, like Patrick Mahomes. It felt like 2 teams really liked him when he was coming out of college. Andy Reid, Sean Payton. Half the league thought he was like the most overrated prospect of all time. Honestly, I thought Jaden Daniels, I'm like, I don't know, man. And you watch him, you're like, this guy's incredible. And I think universally around the league, if you did a redraft, most I, you, there's no way you could take Caleb Williams over Jaden Daniels. Doesn't mean he's going to be better forever, but Bryce Young, incredible comeback story. No one would take him over CJ Stroud. So the power of a quarterback, it changes your franchise. A coach and a quarterback change your franchise. But when it comes to Shador, when it comes to Cam Ward, when it comes to the next crop of quarterbacks over the next several years, we have absolutely no clue. None. I mean, I always thought, not he's way worse than I thought he'd be, but I did think Trevor Lawrence, like being compared to Andrew Luck, I remember thinking that was pretty crazy. But I remember two of my close buddies in the NFL that do that area, like, couldn't have loved him anymore. So I'm like, yeah, I'll come along with it. Awesome. This guy's gonna be an elite player. And you watch him, and you're like, I don't know, man. Hell, even Doug Peterson last year at the combine, I remember bullshit with him, and Doug loved him. Doug's like, this guy's a player, man. Listen, say what you want about Doug, the coach. Doug played quarterback in the league for over a decade, was around Dan fucking Marino and Brett Favre. Like, that's who he backed up. Dan Marino, Brett Favre. So I would say Doug Peterson has a pretty good idea, and he took Nick Foles, who outdueled Tom Brady in a Super Bowl. Pretty good idea what quarterback play looks like. You can be fooled at any moment. At any moment. Where in basketball, it's like, no. Cooper Flag, as long as he doesn't eat himself out of the NBA or tear some knee up, is going to be an all-star. That is a 100% lock. Where if you tell me right now Cam Ward goes number one overall, I could be like, he could make 4 Pro Bowls, or he could not get his fifth-year option picked up and be out of the league in 5 years. We just saw Zach Wilson, who Chris Sims and a bunch of people are like, he's got an Aaron Rodgers level skill set. Joe Douglas, who was making $6 million a year to be a GM, who had won multiple Super Bowls with the Ravens and the Eagles, been to Super Bowls and won them as an executive, picked him number 2 overall. I mean, he'll be on his, I don't know, third team in 5 years next year, assuming the Broncos don't bring him back as the backup, where he was not the backup this year. He was the third stringer. I just think it's fascinating, and it's never going to change. It is by far the hardest position to scout. Even some of the other positions, like, yeah, I think Austin Gentry should be a several-time Pro Bowler. Would it shock me if he's actually kind of overrated? Yeah, potentially. I mean, I wouldn't be floored if you tell me, you know what, Gentry's just okay in the NFL. Because I could see the argument 3 years in. It's like, well, he played in the Mountain West. It just doesn't quite translate. The SEC schedule was a little different. The guy from Iowa turned out to be way better. No one has any clue. No one does. Like Abdul Carter, I would say, I have a hard time seeing that guy not be good. But like, what if he's got shoulder problems? What if it just never works? I don't know. And that's the hard part of football is like injuries are such a big part of it. It's just fascinating, man. And I love the draft and I love talking about this stuff. But every year is like, these guys can't miss. Like, yeah, I think Tyler Warren, this guy's an awesome tight end prospect. How fast is he? Is he going to be able to get open on people nonstop? Or is it not going to matter because he's 6'6"? Can he just play basketball literally over every DB and linebacker's head? Maybe. Or maybe that speed, I don't know. And I like all these guys I'm listing off, but I've liked a lot of players, like a lot of people, watched them in college. And they get to the NFL, it's like, yeah, guy kind of sucks. And this guy no one thought was going to be good ends up becoming like, makes $100 million in the NFL. No one was talking about Puka Nacua, and now you watch Puka Nacua, you're like, he's one of the best players in the NFL. That's how fast it happens. Jared Verse, everyone last year, it's like, yeah, I don't know. He's just a power guy from Albany. Now it's like, shit, Jared Verse, how high is this guy's ceiling? Does this guy have a chance to be like a Hall of Famer? That's how fast it changes.